Hello everyone and welcome to our second part of chapter 5. In this part we are going to continue whatever we have discussed in the first part that was about the operating system and its concepts. The last point that we have stopped at was the different operating systems that have been introduced in the market for the recent time. There are actually three. If you remember, there are three main operating systems that are being used currently. Where most of, I mean, like where the most common one is actually the Windows and then Mac OS, and also Linux is actually started to appear into the ground, especially when the that kind of beautiful user interface and user friendly kind of interface started to being implemented and deployed. As you remember, I mean, like as we know, Linux actually has meant to be for the networking and those kind of professional related tasks and scenarios. Well, so in this slide or like in this session, I'm going to walk you through the other part of the operating systems, and there is actually a concept that it's called virtualization. Virtualization actually it's just a kind of a modern technology or kind of a modern concept that has been brought up into the surface, especially when the need for multiple operating systems have have been a kind of a high necessity. So virtualization in itself is about the dividing the physical computer that you have into multiple computers. How is that possible? It is by having a software or like kind of a platform um, that is actually handling this kind of distribution to the hardware resources. Well, okay, I mean, like regardless that kind of explanation, let's just narrow down the definition and make the and make the definition is kind of readable as you can see here. So one of the definitions of virtualization concept is that the ability to support multiple operating systems that run independently on a single PC or on a single machine. So meaning I have a single machine like the one I'm running on, and in this case I'll be able to to launch different operating systems on it. So how is that possible? It is by using the what we call the virtualization software. Well, before the virtualization software, so actually why do we need that? Why in fact do we need to make virtualization? Well, as I told you, so virtualization, and as all of us knows, so it actually depends by the purpose. So some people, especially in the field of IT, particularly, this is actually very common. Some people they need virtualization for purpose of experimentation and for purpose of training. For example, you are actually doing you are required to run like a specific application that might not be able to be run on the common operating system you are using, for example, Windows. So let's say that like your instructor or your trainer in any of the the academic institutions you're affiliated asks you to to run a particular software that is actually running on Linux, for example. So in this case you cannot actually use Windows as a platform, as an operating system to run that kind of software, because what we have studied just in the last class is that the applications cannot be installed in the applications of different operating systems cannot be installed in each other, meaning that the installer for like a Windows based operating system, the Windows operating system cannot be used actually within the Linux operating system or Mac OS. So that's why in this case, and for that reason, there is actually a huge need to to come up with having the the physical machine to support more than one operating system. Well, before that, there was actually a need for virtualization, but before the technology came into the market and became kind of commercialized, it was actually a very tedious task, especially for scientists and professionals who are tending to running more than running all these kind of scattered applications over the machines. In this case, instead of having one single machine, they are required to have two different physical machines in order to install a different operating system on each machine. And this is actually was number one, was very costly. Number two, it actually needs a lot of configuration and troubleshooting. So virtualization came into the place in order to solve this problem and enable, like using multiple operating systems within one machine. Well, so actually there are a lot to talk about that, and there's actually more and more information and details that I can share with you in this, but actually due to the time limitation and due to the scope of this course, I will not be actually opening up the discussion in order to, to limit the scope and to focus your attention, your attention to be within, the points within the slides. Well, so let's just move to the, to the point of virtualization software. So what does it mean by that? Well, each virtualization, in order to be realized, it is not actually kind of, it is not kind of supported by Windows by default. So, like, okay, here I'm having Windows 10. But actually, in Windows 10 by itself, whenever you install it, it doesn't has any kind of tool that supports virtualization, but you can install kind of an outsourced tools from the internet. There are actually many under the hood, and one of the most famous, the most famous of them is that this one that actually I'm currently been using, and I have been using also another one, but recently this is the one that I'm using. So VMware Workstation. Actually, this is has been developed by Microsoft. However, it's not actually in Microsoft. It's not built in the operating system, but you need to go and install it from the internet. Well, it has actually a different license methods. This is actually the non-commercialized one, and you can see here I'm able to build and create a virtual machine that actually being prepared to be installed or to accept a kind of Windows Server 2012, which is actually another environment, in fact. However, it is actually a product of Microsoft, but also I can actually do that. Even I can actually install and I can prepare a virtual machine to install Windows 10. But most likely, people when they use that either to test, as I'm actually doing this, either to test and try a specific application or or taking it for training purpose, or it is to actually work and run some specific applications in different environments. Well, so the points that we need to talk about regarding the virtualization software, and I believe that you have already taken this during the lab. If you remember, during our first lab, I have introduced you about like the practical sides of the virtual machine, which is this one typically. But here I'm trying to connect this to be into the theory. Well, so the points that you need to consider about the virtualization, besides those that we have discussed before, is that a physical machine here can actually can be logically um, uh, separated into independent virtual machines. So how is that possible? And these machines, these machines that has been separated, which is like this one, I call it as a virtual machine. So this one is actually called a virtual machine. I do not want to go into the practical side of that. I can actually show you, but I want you to remember, and I want you to go back and remember those, those steps that we have taken in order to create a virtual machine. From here, you can actually install that software, and I believe that this is the best way to learn about virtual machine rather than, just keeping, rather than taking it enough with the, with the theoretical part. Well, so the hosting operating system, which is Windows 10 in this case that I'm having here, it is called the hosting operating system. This is the operating system that is being installed in the physical machine. While the operating system that is installed in the virtual machine, as you can see here in this example, this is the guest operating system. So in this case, I'm having Windows Server 2012 as the guest operating system. Well, so all right, so actually, there are a lot to talk about the virtual machine. You can actually, I believe that even whatever text in the book, whatever details in the book, they are actually not even sufficient enough even to go, and describe the virtualization and virtual machines. But at least you can take that resource, that material, the textbook, as your main reference. But if you're like interested to go with more details, you can just type a virtualization or like virtual machine through Google, and you'll find a bunch of resources that can help you in understanding and adjusting the topic well. All right, so in another point here, we have another part, another kind of operating system. Okay, um, well, let me just before this, because actually I feel that actually virtualization here is not is supposed to be actually explained much more well than this. Well, let me just go, and I believe that I do not actually need to go with the practical part, but I believe that in order to clarify this idea more, let me just go and tell you, I mean, like, what do we mean by a virtual machine? Because here we are talking about the, so, I mean, like building a computer system that it's not actually physical, meaning that it's not tangible, it's not touchable. All right, it is that we are sharing the resources here, as I'm telling you. Well, if I type dx here, um, they are all right. So let me just wait for that dx. Yeah. All right, so it's here. So if I type this here, I can show you this is the, I mean, like the different specifications of the hardware that I'm having here. So for example, I'm having that amount of RAM, and then I'm having that kind of a processor in here, which is Intel Core i7, and then I'm having the display, and I have the sound card. So, and plus that, I can show you that I have the, I mean, like the disk beside this. You can just easily go through that by going into computer, I mean, like this computer. Well, so all of these other resources, these are called the, I mean, like the physical resources. So here, what we are intending to do by having virtualization is to take some of these resources using that kind of application. So that's why this is the importance of this virtualization software. So we call this as a virtualization software here. So in this kind of software here, so in this kind of software, it helps us to create a virtual machine creates a virtual machine by having, I mean, like by cutting off some, I mean, like some amount of from the hard disk. For example, you can just take about 20 gigs of the hard disk, and then you can maybe take like dedicate like 2 or 3 CPUs. Let me just walk you through here. So like here, for example, this is the virtual machine that I have created. So I have taken like reserved 2 gigs for the virtual machine to be the RAM memory here. And for the processor here, I can allocate like, of course, you need to check up your, I mean, like your physical device, I mean, like your physical capabilities, your physical system capabilities in order to decide that. But anyway, for me, I have 8 processors. So here I can like assign like 2 of them. But the thing is that you cannot like you need to make sure that you cannot actually assign the whole amount of RAM, for example, or whole amount of processor, because of course the main operating system that actually that is actually running that kind of virtualization software, it has to has the majority of that physical software. So meaning that it is much better for you when you plan whenever you're planning, so it's much better for you to plan for like almost like 1/4 or like 1/5 of the hardware processing. I mean, like of the hardware capabilities. Well, so well again, here for the hard disk, for example, I'm actually taking out about 25 gigs as the maximum capacity to be, and then whatever, I mean, like whatever other peripherals here, like display, printer, sound card, and USB and network adapter, they will be actually auto configure. And this is actually the beauty of such. This is the beauty, and this is the importance of such virtualization software, is that they do not actually you do not need to configure and build the operating system, I mean, like build the computer system from scratch. Only those kind of things, like the main things, which are the memory, the processor, and the hard disk, because those are actually the, I mean, like the resources that are kind tend to be limited. And I mean, like the people who have created this kind of webs, I mean, like this kind of software, they already know that they cannot actually like provide their own recommendation. However, they can advise you that okay, so we recommend you to use that, but they will let you to freely choose according to your needs, because sometimes you may not want to use the entire disk, let's say for example, or you may not want to use the entire RAM or majority of your RAM. Okay, so this should be planned so carefully. Well, so let's just now move to the other part, which is about the mobile operating system. This is actually another part of the operating system that it's actually tend to be for the handheld devices. So remember that. So if you like from the previous class, we were talking about, like we were describing that the operating system that comes for the mobile and the handheld, it is called embedded operating system. So it is present in the every type of the phone. So characteristics for that kind of operating system, of course, it has to be it has to be energy wise, meaning that energy aware, so that it doesn't run a lot of applications that are actually unnecessarily wanted in the back end, so that the battery will be consumed. Because you see, mobile phones, I mean, like handheld devices, they do not have a permanent source of power supply. I mean, like unlike the desktop and the laptops. So that's why here, whatever operating system, it has to take care of the processing capability. So any operating system that meant to be designed for the mobile, it has to think, it has to take care of, the design pattern of it. It has to take care of like being efficiently utilizing the power of the mobile. So the power of the mobile, again, it's being consumed by keeping the mobile running all the time, by keeping a lot of processes running in the back end. So these are the things. So second thing here is that the operating system here, it should be less complicated and more specialized for wireless communication. So less complicated here, meaning that it should be direct to the point. So you don't need to have a lot of functions in a software that actually is meant to do one particular task. For example, a software it's meant to be for the it is meant to be used for the alarm here. So it should have only the alarm system, beside some kind of other other related only operate tasks. Well, so the second thing here, again, as I was focusing, is that it should be actually supporting wireless communication a lot, because of course we do not have any other mean of communication in the mobile phones but only wireless communication. So all applications has to have the all the available functionalities that actually support wireless communication. Could be like being able to connect with different networks, having a lot of having variety of different encryption and access method to to different kind of networking. So whether to be VPN, whether to be kind of a private network, or even like kind of home network. So well, some of the best well-known operating systems here for mobile, and I believe this is the first one, Symbian. It happened to be, it happened to be used and marked as the actually the legacy operating system for mobile, especially when we talk about like Nokia and Sony. Well, there are actually many under the hood, but those are the the most important and the most well-known operating systems. So, for example, BlackBerry, iPhone, and Android, and of course Windows happen to be very common. So, in the next slide, I'm going to to describe them one by one, and I believe that if you refer back to the textbook, you'll find even more details about each of them. Well, Symbian here, it is originated at 2010, of course, in Japan. So mainly it was used in Nokia, and I believe Nokia has been so robust in using Symbian for the reason that is that this operating system happened to be the most robust operating system that has ever been designed in for mobile systems. It has a very tiny level of errors, and in the same way, also it is very fast and happen to be built for those for those mobiles that have less and minimum kind of hardware capabilities. So that's why Nokia and Sony, they have been taking the chance, or like taking the opportunity to to contract with that company that is actually building that operating system. So of course, it controls most of the smartphones all over the world. Even not only Nokia and Sony, but those happen to be the first two, the first two companies, mobile companies who are actually the cooperating or like collaborating with that company. To run the to run that operating system and make use of it. So the second one here is a BlackBerry. Well, BlackBerry here has been introduced in 1999, and it's from a Canadian research company, and actually it only works in a BlackBerry mobile phone. So, however, that kind of operating system, it was kind of limited to say. So that's why, because it actually was meant to be designed for BlackBerry mobile phones. So iPhone here, on the other hand, it actually was actually provided by the same manufacturing company to who are actually producing Apple, who are producing Mac operating systems, which is Apple. So one of the fastest growing operating system, it's because of the popularity of Apple products. So that's why iPhone OS happened to be most widely used until the day actually. Well, Android actually happened to be recently kind of a recent operating system, mobile operating system, and yet happened to be the most, the most dominant operating system in most of the phones, because actually many companies and many mobile manufacturers are actually depending on the Android operating system. And actually, let me tell you, one of the strengths of the Android OS, unlike the other operating system that we have discussed, is that it is an open source operating system. That's why it has a very huge and very strong community support in order to contribute in many functions and many features here. That's why in terms of robustness, it is actually there. In terms of long-term use and long-term evolution, it is already there, and it's already sitting on the top of the of the pyramid. Well, Windows Phone 7 here, it is actually it's a version of Windows 7, but however it's only it has been used under mobile phone. So it is just a lightweight version of Windows 7, which has been introduced in 2017. Many improvement. It actually considered many improvement on Windows Mobile and WinCE. Those are the two variants of Microsoft-based mobile operating systems. So it is designed for users who are actively using social networking. So that's why that's actually the main feature or the main main trait of Windows Phone 7. So considering social networking and instant messaging. All right, so coming to another point that it's actually related to utilities. So here, when we mention utilities, so we meant by those kind of programs that are actually attached to the operating system in order to make that whole computer system task and computing process a whole lot easier and even smoother. So let me just ask you, in which case computing can be difficult. So we meant here to make it so easy. So then, well, fine. So what are the reasons, or what are the cases that makes that kind of computer system to be kind of difficult and the computing process to be difficult? So of course those should be those should be highlighted as a problems, or as a difficulties that you actually kind of facing in your daily life, especially if you're having your own personal laptop, and then you just came to the point that, oh, my laptop is already hanging off a lot. So there might be a reason for that. And actually for that, we are using what we call utilities, or a specialized kind of programs, in order to tackle out and address out those kind of symptoms that may happen. Well, so most essential utilities here, examples that you can see, and of course more details can be reached out in that page that has been highlighted in here. You can see troubleshooting or diagnostics programs. So these are the categories of the utilities. What are the categories of them? Antivirus softwares or antivirus programs, uninstalling programs. So all of these are utilities. Backup programs, file compression programs, and even many and others behind the list here. Well, let's just talk about each of them one by one in here. Particularly when we mention about Windows, actually kind of well, let me just tell you what about troubleshooting and diagnostics. Of course, troubleshooting, we mean by it is to fix any specific issue with the operating system itself. Like for example, you have a missing file. You have coincidentally happen to delete one of the system files, okay? Or in any of your drivers, like for example, the wireless card or the wireless software is not working fine. Maybe you have deleted some files related to, for example, the sound driver. So all of those kind of things that makes the computer doesn't work well, particularly when we talk about the connected devices, like the screen, like the mouse, like the internet. The connectivity, which is about the internet or the wireless, it's to say. So all of these. So antivirus programs, of course, this kind of programs are really famous and really common, and they happen to be meant for detecting and providing a high security level for the operating system. However, nowadays, especially when you talk about Windows itself, like Windows 10 here, we have actually a built-in antivirus programs and a built-in security system here. If you can go through here, you can see we already have like a security platform here that actually meant to be implemented in more than one aspect here, securing your device, securing your application and control. So all of these are actually kind of utilities that has been provided by the operating system itself. Yet there are like in the market and commercialized products or applications, a lot of softwares like for example McAfee, um, Norton antivirus. We have also Kaspersky, and a lot behind us, and a lot behind that list. VGA, Avast, as I remember. So many of them actually existed there. Well, uninstalling programs. So of course, this is actually a trait, or this is a feature that happened to be within the like the Windows. Like it enables you to go and actually install whatever. Uninstall whatever softwares that has been installing here. So actually, all of this. This is install or change a program. So this is a very good. It's a very good kind of tool that enables you to gather all the softwares in one list and then select which one to uninstall. Because the other way, if you don't have this, the other way is that you need to go to the programs through the program file and try to look for the uninstaller, in a manual way, which is actually more tedious and time consuming at the same time. So backup programs here we talk about like you have a failure in a computer and you want to keep an image or like keep a copy of the whole operating system. Could be from the keep a copy for the whole operating system, or like your data itself, your personal data. So you could do that actually using Windows backup here, like the backup settings, or like typing backup. All right, so backup and synchronization to Google, or like a backup settings here. So there are actually many tools. There are actually many tools available in order to allow you to do like those kind of backup stuff and saving your data in another storage, or like media of storage. So, well, file compression programs. So, of course, those are the kind of programs that allow you to compress and decompress the file. Simply, we talk about here in Windows. Actually, there is a built-in compressing utility, but it's not really famous. So, the one that is actually more famous, which is an outsourced one called WinRAR, or like WinZip, or like Z7, if I'm not mistaken. So, all of these are actually happen to be more dominant than the built-in compressing program. Of course, compressing program here I need to mention to you is that the main thing that we do compression to the file. It is to reduce its size in the first place, and then it is when you have like hundreds of files, it will be like much easier for you to compress them and move them. That will actually ensure that you are copying or moving them as a one whole package, in order to ensure that there is nothing being lost through through the copy of the single file by file. Well, so let's just talk about like Windows utilities in particular. However, we were talking about like just now most of the examples we were giving through the discussion here. It was about actually the Windows in particular. But anyway, so of course here, as the points are suggesting, so we have three dimensions of the utilities. However, I believe that even more than three dimensions are existed, especially when you talk about like Windows 7, Windows 10. But those are the most, like, let's say, the most common, or like the and examples of the most common utilities that you may find. So backup, disk cleanup, and disk defragment. Well, so talking about them, like each of them in particular. So again, as I mentioned, utility program here it is included with the, with many Windows version, and it allows, so what calls for this? Like here, the question, like what I'm asking, that why do we need to make backup and restore? What kind of reason that actually allows you to, to go for such a, for such a utility? I will just leave this kind of question open to you, because I would like to see this even in any of your assessment. I would be actually re-asking this again, to see what are the actually kind of the thoughts that you may think of. It's actually a kind of an open-ended question here. Well, so it makes a copy. This is how actually it makes a copy of all the files or the selected files that have been saved in a disk, and then um, it helps to prevent against disk failure. So of course here um, we are doing this in order to make sure that our disk is not fail. But here the important thing, believe it, I mean, like you need to take this in mind. Important thing here is not the computer hardware; it is actually the data here, because some people, especially like when it comes to professional life and working careers, so their actually data actually values too much. It values actually away more than the computer itself. So whether the computer hard disk is failed or not doesn't matter, as long as you have a backup of that data. All right. So here we do the backup and restore because actually we are valuing the data. We value the data a lot. So that's why we need to keep and make sure that these kind of sensitive data and kind of important data are being actually redundantly backed up. Well, because of course here you see, talking about the computer system again as another reason, it is like finally the computer system, it's just any electronical system, it's just an electronical device, meaning that at any point of time, whether to be like after like 1 month, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after usage, of course it will come into the point that it starts to act, like abnormally, and you could see, like those kind of failures, especially like if you're just using a lot of applications without actually giving without giving a consideration into the maintenance of the operating system. Well, coming again to coming back coming to the next point here, that is about this cleanup. It is a troubleshooting utility that identifies and eliminates the non-essential files. So why do we need to do that again? Why do we need to do the disk cleanup? Why do we need actually to to make a troubleshooting and eliminate those kind of non-essential files to say? Of course, the answer here is actually kind of straightforward to say. So it is of course number one to speed up the the computer system. It is to speed up the system itself, because the more unneeded file, the more those kind of dump file that we can say in another meaning, they of course they will slow down the hard disk, because they will number one take a space, unneeded space or unwanted space. Number two, they are actually filling up the space, especially when we talk about like those kind of new technologies in the hard disks that are like, for example, the SSD, whereby as the disk is getting nearer to be full, the performance of the disk is actually getting slower, right? So this is actually this is actually the feature, or not the feature to say, or this is actually the characteristic that actually those kind of modern hard disks are actually being handling with. So that's why we need to make sure that actually this should be available and only contains that kind of information that we need. And number three here, from another point, is that we want to prevent those kind of vulnerabilities. And believe it or not, actually, most of the attackers, whenever they are launching their own software, so these softwares are actually targeting these kind of unnecessary files, these kind of files that are not being familiar with us, but they tend to be there in our hard disk. So by attacking them, or like by like initiating a malicious code there by anyhow and any meaning of the the attack, of course we could have a kind of a vulnerability and a security threat, or a security threatening situation here. So what it does here, so how what does the disk cleanup what it does here, it actually frees up the uh, frees up the valuable space and improves the system performance. So here, of course, we talk about like freeing up more space in the disk. Of course, by scanning, of course, it goes with a scanning the disk. For those kind of historical data, those kind of data that has come from the internet, because once you are visiting a lot of websites, of course, there is a lot of data being stored. Once you're even opening application and using that kind of any application within your machine, of course, the computer system, it stores and creates kind of a temporary data files and a temporary containers for that application. So even some applications, when you even uninstall them and remove them from the computer, they still remain some files that cannot be removed automatically unless you just go and locate them and remove them. So those files, after a while and after a longer time of being there, they will be I mean like they will be pointed as a dump file and unessential files because they have not been updated for a longer time. So there are actually many external applications to do that. However, in Windows we have what we call like this cleanup for the different drivers here. But I mean like those kind of applications that are existed in I mean like in outside Windows, of course they provide much more functions, but of course none of them are actually free to use. Meaning that you need to buy their license in order to be able to use them. Examples here: CCleaner and Speed Up My PC, as I remember actually, and there are actually many behind that. Well, so disk fragmentation here in the third point, it is a it is here another task or like all right, so like disk fragmentation, it is actually disk defragmentation, but like I'm just bringing this slide to you. I'm bringing this slide to you. It is I mean like to educate you what do we mean by fragmentation itself before we talk about like the defragmentation. Because here fragmentation, it's a situation that we are trying to avoid here. So that's why we have disk defragmenter. Defragmenter, from the name, if I mean like of for those who do not really I mean like mind the name itself, fragmentation here, it comes from fragment meaning segment. All right, so segmenting or splitting. So here we are talking about like how the disk is being splitted. Why do we need to split it? It's actually to store information here. So there are two major I mean like there are two concepts here when we talk about like disk fragmentation. The first one here, of course, both of them, they describe how file, I mean, all of this describes how files are being stored in the hard disk, especially when we talk about like those kind of mechanical hard disks, the old-fashioned hard disks. I mean, like the classical one. We're not talking about the SSD, which are the modern technology in the hard disks. All right. So, in the HDD, like the mechanical kind of hard disk, so we have what we call track here. And you can see here, this is in the, I mean like, as the figure here illustrates. So all of these circles, each of them, it is called a track. So it is a ring here, which is equivalent to a wedge-shaped sections called sectors here. So of course here, so it is like, this is like a wedge-shaped sections here. This one or this piece here, it's called a sector. All right, so fragmentation occurs here when an operating system tries to save a file over different sectors. Okay, so for example here, happen to be in the same track. For example here, I want to save an information or a file that happen to be I mean like the operating system here is obligated, or it's actually wanted to save it here in the second ring, for example. So here, meaning that I'm actually saving it over different fragments or over different sectors. Okay, so not only one file. By the time you are actually saving a lot of files in this way, so your disk will be like it's a mix-up. So it's a mix-up of different files. So whenever you just take any sector, you'll find that this sector is actually containing, each layer here contains contains information from different file. So okay, so from time to another, those files are actually, I mean, like whenever you delete them or like you modify them, of course they will leave kind of an empty spaces in here that are actually tend to be used, but they are actually reserved spaces. So how is this actually? So how is this happening? I mean, like how do we save that file within the same sector, or like within the same track? It is by splitting the file into small fragments. Here we are splitting the file here into small fragments. So fragment 1 will come here, fragment 2 may come here, fragment 3 maybe come here, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is actually what we call by disk fragmentation. Well, so how files are being stored in the hard disk? So when the file is retrieved here, it is constructed. So later on, whenever we want to retrieve the file, so of course the file will be reconstructed, gathered again from whatever sectors here, like this line, it will be combined with that, with its portion of that line, and also will be combined with the other relative, and the other, I mean, like the rest of the portions happen to be within the same track here until the file is being built back again. Well, so through the time here, the problem here is that through the time, more fragment spaces will be existed there, and there will be this will actually this will slow the read and write of the process itself. So meaning that accessing, reading and write, copying and retrieving from the hard disk, it will be kind of difficult to, like, to attempt or to perform. So with that case, like for that situation here, we have what we call this defragmenter. It is a tool that has been invented, and it has been designed by the Microsoft Windows in the operating system, and I believe also it's already existed in the other operating systems, for example in Linux or like Mac OS. And the aim of that tool, it is to, like, to identify and eliminate unnecessary fragments after the file has been deleted or moved from that track. So it may have left some kind of footprints, meaning that it's just a metadata file that is actually related to that file. However, it's not actually used anymore, but it's just left there because the file was there and restoring information. So the defragmenter here, it actually rearranges the file. First, it identifies and eliminates unnecessary fragments, and also it actually rearranges the files and unused disk space in order to optimize the operation. So at the end, we are actually speeding the file access, as I mentioned to you. Well, all right, so talking about the another point here, that it's actually utility suites here. So all right, so we were just now discussing about like different utilities here, as you can see, and even many beyond this list. So here there are actually some products or like some softwares that are actually called utility suites. Those suites are actually grouping a lot of, or like a set of different tools together that can be handled within one application in order to perform different and variety of utilities for the computer system. So one of them here, like for example here, combining several utility applications, for example, cleaning, defragging, maybe DLL fixing. DLL is actually it is actually like the operating system files, those kind of files that are actually happen to store the data of the operating system. So these kind of files actually, whenever they have been, like some of them deleted, they may actually cause some of abnormal behavior from the operating system whenever you are interacting in a specific or a special in a specific or a particular side in the operating system. Other things here is that the registry fix, and we know that the registry here, it is actually the main brain of the operating system services. So it is the controller for the different services and application, how the application can be triggered, how the application can be like up to which level can be accessed, and all of these different things. So playing out with the registry, sometimes it could be like a critical issue that may cause the whole system to be shut down. All right. So these packages are available in the market, and you can buy them. And of course, having them all together, of course, that will be more affordable than buying each operating system and than buying each different application or utility in a separate way. So of course, they are actually together. They are more affordable because they are providing you a lot of utilities within one whole package. So popular sites here, or like popular suits, to say. Norton System Works, McAfee Office, and also vCommunication System Suite here. Well, device drivers. So each device has actually a driver that is connected to it. So for example, you have your mouse. Whenever you're buying a new mouse, you're connecting it to your Windows, especially like when we talk about Windows in particular, having it to be the most common operating system. So whenever you're connecting it to Windows, you will notice here, and like in the rightmost side here, a little icon has popped up and telling you that so it is trying to identify the device in here. So this is actually a type of a device software. So whatever, like what is going on in that case, it is actually Windows is actually automatically installing on our behalf the like the software and the application that can be used in order to identify and make that mouse being able to interact with the different, like with the rest of the computer system. And this is actually a good example for, like to clarify this. So specialized programs that allow to communication between a device and a computer. So these are the kind of programs that we meant. So, like for example, the mouse software, for example, the pen drive, the keyboard, sometimes the speakers, the webcam. So all of these are actually having each of them whenever you are connecting the printer itself also, especially the printer when I mean like sometimes it needs you to go through that because of course Windows cannot actually detect it may be able to detect the main driver of it, but sometimes you need to install a kind of like an application or like a package application that enables you to interact more deeper and more sophisticatedly with the like with the printer device itself, with the printer functions. So that's why you need to install that as an I mean, like from its different CD or like from its product source media. So it is loaded into the memory each time the computer. So these kind of device drivers of the softwares, they are automatically whenever you're booting your system, they are automatically being loaded up or starting up on the I mean like on the memory. You can actually notice them here because you see if you just right click I mean like go into the task manager, you can find a lot of computers. I mean like a lot of operating things here. A lot of services are being operating here. They are behind the service, or like they are actually running at the back end. So all of these services are actually, let's say for example here, so HD audio. So this is actually like the service or like the driver that actually runs the audio, for example, and many of them actually. All right, so that's why actually they are running at the back end, as we can see here. Um, so when a new device is added, a device driver, of course, must be installed. So Windows here, it of course supports many of the devices, as we can notice here. But of course, sometimes you may need to go and manually go through the wizard. I mean, like go through I mean, like an installation. And for that, actually, even Windows add a device wizard here. It actually provides us a way in order to detect and find that kind of device software through Windows platform, that you don't need to go and look for it from its product's website, but rather Windows will help you to I mean like to detect this and give you some options so that you can select the most appropriate one. Well, so the last point in here, talking about the virus protection and internet security. So of course there are actually, as you know, there are many suits. There are many suits for the internet security, and why do we need that? As long as we are actually accessing the internet, the vulnerability and I mean like the threat from from the malicious security attack will be actually highly possible there. So that's why we need to protect our computer systems, especially whenever you're downloading pictures, you're downloading you're downloading files, you're actually clicking and opening links throughout the emails. So all of these are actually kind of vulnerable sites that may trigger any kind of a threat in any time. So virus scan here, it is actually an operation that performs a scanning all over the system, all over your computer system, in order to make sure that your computer system having the files that are not suspicious, and any kind of files that can be kind of suspicious. Maybe those files that contains a special, a kind of suspicious code, for example, especially those files that includes a cracking or licensing or any kind of JavaScript coding, whatever coding that looks like abnormal to the to the database of the antivirus. Of course, it will detect it. So the detection here, it's that the antivirus here, from time to time, it updates itself, the antivirus, so that database of the files, it can be improved in order to measure and compare. So if that kind of file it's actually kind of suspicious or vulnerable to the system or not, it can be compared with the database. So that's why it's actually highly advisable whenever you have any kind of software, antivirus software, is to keep it up to date. Don't actually disable the update. However, sometimes those updates may actually slow down the processing or like slow down the computer, but if you're seeking a high security level, you will need to actually keep them up to date and running, and like keep the software automatically being up to date. So also these kind of softwares, the antivirus softwares, it helps to improve the privacy. They work as a privacy service, so it helps you to protect your own privacy online. If you want actually not your data to be exposed, you're actually accessing a website and you do not want your, I mean, like your inserted data. For example, you are inserting your email in any of the text field in any of the forms in the websites. You do not want that text field to be copied or to be stored in that website server. So whenever you have that, you can have that, I mean, like that feature from the antivirus in order to, and like whenever the session exits, it will delete all the files, and it will delete all the data that you have entered in that form. Okay, so also blocking website cookies and not enabling the websites to store, because of course whenever you are visiting any website, it needs to store some data on your computer so that it can be easy for the, or like for the browser, and to smoothly access the website once again once you are actually trying to, I mean, like browse through that kind of website. Well, so this is actually that was the last point in our discussion here. And so moving to that, actually, we're talking about the careers in IT. I will just leave this to you to read, because actually it's just, I mean, like the part for you to get knowledge about. So how, I mean, like how to be a specialist in a computer system and how to be a specialist in an operating system. So of course, this will need you to have a lot of skills related to problems and networking, how to handle the different networking systems and troubles. Also, you need to have a capability in different programming, especially when we talk about like those kind of modern programming, like for example the Python, the C++, the C Sharp. So all of those are actually really needed and really a hot kind of skills on the top of the IT skills. All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for watching this tutorial, and I hope that if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask and discuss with me through the discussion or the Google virtual classroom that we have created. So with that, thank you so much, and we'll see you in another video.